I am here with Jayme Wooster for the Digital Veteran Stories Project. Jayme is a student veteran at UCCS in the pre-nursing program, and today he's going to share with us some of his experiences as not only a soldier but as a student, particularly concerning his first deployment and his transition into being a student. Jayme, you can begin whenever you're ready.
I remember I first got to Fort Hood, Texas, after getting out of Fort Sam Houston, my AIT, as a combat medic, and I was in the replacement area for all of 10 minutes before this older, tall gentleman, and he was the guy was like 6'5", easy, and just skinny as a rail, and he walks up and he really aggressively gave me a knife hand, and he was like, "You, what do you do?" "I'm a medic, sergeant." And I go to parade rest the whole night, and he goes, "You follow me." So I'm right out of AIT. I'm really green, and they walk me right into this area, and it says 555th Forward Surgical Team on the door, triple nickel. And I was like, "I don't know what a forward surgical team is." He goes, "You don't need to. Just sit here and wait for us." And I was like, "Roger." And I sat down, and there were two other E5s with me, and another E2 who had just gotten out of AIT with me as well. And I quickly learned that we were there to interview for a position with the forward surgical team. And out of the four of us, they actually ended up taking the two lowest ranking guys, me and my buddy Daniel Williams. It was just us and these two E5s. They were like, "Yeah, whatever, we don't want you here." And we actually had to go in and interview for the position. And they took us because, A, we didn't have a lot of the bad habits that some of the older medics had. But we'd also both worked as paramedics on the outside, so we had a lot of experience already. And it was like a year to the day after that we came down on orders for a 15-month deployment to Afghanistan. And we were getting to this little, well, at the time it was kind of this little hole of a place called Jalalabad. It was about 1.5 miles long and maybe a quarter of a mile wide. I swear to God, you could have thrown a rock all the way over the fob if you were outside the wire. It was just this long skinny, and it was just basically an airstrip that had some hooches and DFAC and some other small amenities like that. And when I was getting ready to tell the story, I had to think for a bit which story I want to do, because we were there for 15 months and we did a lot of stuff. But basically, a forward surgical team is a small 20-person operation, fully manned, and we perform life-saving surgical interventions as the first point after point of injury. So before they get to a hospital, before they get to a cache or whatever, they would fly them to us first, and then we would take care of them there, and we would basically just do surgical interventions to stop the bleeding, stabilize the patient, so that they could go on further, get more definitive care. We weren't really a definitive care surgical force, but we were able to manage a lot of trauma before it became a really big issue, because the airtime there from point of injury for some of these guys was over 45 minutes before they'd get to a hospital. Some places it was even worse, but we were located in such a convenient spot that they could fly them into us after maybe a 10-15 minute flight. We could give them some surgical care and then move them on, and they'd be way more stable. But I remember one of the first real bad calls we had was there were these 4 kids, and normally we don't take care of locals. But in our downtime, a couple of our surgeons decided that they wanted to do some minor outpatient surgical care for the local people, kind of win the hearts and minds sort of thing. Now, it was against our medical rules of engagement, but we got higher up to approve it. So we started taking like appendectomies and stuff like that, nothing really chronic. But I remember one day at the gate, this huge van just pulls up, and we get a call from the gate saying that there's a bunch of kids. They don't know what happened, but these kids are really in a bad way. So the surgeon waves them in, and I get the call and I run up to the ATLS, the Advanced Trauma Life Support area, and they start setting up my bed. Getting the heart monitor ready, getting bags spiked, getting everything ready to go for these patients. And at the time, I had no idea what it was. I just knew I had to be there and get my stuff ready. So I was in the spot executing, and these 4 kids coming on stretchers, and they looked like they were 6, 7 maybe. But in Afghanistan, due to the nutrition problems they were probably closer to 12 or 13. But these kids come down on stretchers, and they put the stretchers on right on top of my area, and they get this kid off, and all these kids are hurt. But the one that I ended up with was a kid that didn't have anything below. His whole jaw was missing right down to the collarbone. And I remember his neck was wrapped up real bad. It looked like somebody had just grabbed something, shoved it on the wound, and then wrapped it up with a piece of cloth. So first thing I got to do is I got to take all the clothing off this little kid so I can see where the damage is and how extensive it is. And when I pull back that bandage and his tongue just kind of is right there, I remember just kind of going, oh my God. And it was one of the first times I ever had like a deer in the headlights sort of feeling. I've never seen that before. I was a paramedic, but that's not the sort of thing you would see very often in the civilian world. So it really kind of caught me off guard. And I remember my sergeant, who was in charge of us at the ATLS, he slapped the back of my head like really hard. He caught his wedding ring on my head, and he was like, "Funk." And I was like, "Oh, right, sorry." And I went right into duty mode, and I started executing, getting lines on in this kid. And then the nurse anesthetist walks in and goes, "You need to get an ET tube in there." And so I had to get this ET tube into a kid that didn't have a lower jaw. And it was really hard because I couldn't visualize anything when I'm slipping this ET tube in. I had to do it all by feel, basically. And it took me about 3-4 minutes before I finally got in the right spot. But I remember the nurse anesthetist walks up, goes, and he was Texan. He was as Texan as the day is long. He kind of walks up and goes, "That's a real good job there, Wooster. You could be a nurse." And then he just sauntered off in that Texas fashion he used to. And I look around, and everybody else, like, there's one kid, he's already sitting up in bed. He's got a couple little shrapnel wounds on his arms, kind of peppered him. Turns out they had been playing with a grenade that they had no idea. They had no idea what it was. They'd never seen one before, but they found this grenade just out in the farm somewhere in a field, and they picked it up and they just started playing a game of catch or something to that effect, and then somehow it went off. One kid had a broken arm. One kid just had some peppered wounds. And another kid had a ruptured eardrum, but besides that, he was fine. Of course, my kid was missing a lower jaw, so he was a higher priority than everybody else. And as soon as we got the heart monitors on him, and we had put a 12 lead on him, starting to watch his EKG, and his heart is just doing a mambo. It is all over the place, and his poor little heart was beating so hard, trying to get blood that just wasn't there around in his system. So right away we start hanging red and yellow, blood products basically, and we're trying to get blood back into him. And as soon as we get that bloodline open, we start pumping blood into him, his EKG just flatlines. Just, he's dead on the door. And I remember looking over and being like, whoo, that's bad. So I reach over and I grab some epinephrine, and I'm starting to administer epinephrine directly into the kid's arterial line, which we'd started before. And his heart would just come back and just really erratic pumping. Long story short, he didn't come back. They ended up calling it in the ATLS, and we had to send him home with his parents. The Afghans have a very particular way they deal with their dead. They have to have their thumbs and toes tied together with some sort of white string or rope, and the only thing that can touch them has to be white. And then you move their face so that they're looking towards Mecca. And this is the first time we'd ever had a dead Afghan in our ATLS area, so we didn't know this. Luckily, our interpreter, Muhammad, was fantastic, and he saved us a lot of trouble and a lot of heartache by letting us know exactly what we needed to do. And so that's what we did. And when his parents came in, the Afghan people, when it comes to death, they're very stoic about it. And his father just kind of looked at me, and you could tell he was sad, but it was kind of a stern sadness. His mother, I couldn't see at all. She was wearing a burqa, head to toe. But we sent him out, and that was the first time that my friend, Daniel Williams, had ever seen a dead body, let alone had a dead body suddenly become so in front of him. And he'd never thought in a million years that it would be a little kid like that. Having been in the civilian world for as long as I was as a paramedic, I'd seen people die on me before, so it wasn't something I was particularly unprepared for, although every death takes something from you. But he'd never seen this before, and I remember when we got back to the hooch, the guy looks like he was gonna punch me, or he was gonna scream, and I just remember walking up to him, and I was like, "Is that your first one?" And he just kind of nodded without saying anything, and I just put my hand on his shoulder, and I was like, "It's okay to cry, man. This job gets hard. And if you don't let it out, it'll eat you alive." And he just looked at me, and he had these tears just running down his face. And I was like, "See, I told you. You want to go get some tacos?" And at that moment, he burst out laughing. It was just the most inappropriate thing he could have thought. And he was like, "Well, how could you say that?" And I was like, "Because we're not like other people. We're emergency medical professionals, and we have to deal with things that 90% of the population will never have to deal with. And it's not an easy job. And if you can't learn to laugh at sometimes just silliness, ridiculousness, nothingness, especially at the morbid or the disturbing, if you can't kind of snicker a little bit at it and diffuse that tension and that awkwardness and that pain that kind of comes from having to witness or be a part of it, if you can't somehow diffuse that, that's what kills medics. That's what kills paramedics. It kills their soul. It just breaks their heart. And if you can't find a way to turn that into something more positive, you won't be able to do the job very long or well. And he kind of looked at me, and he nodded like he understood what I was saying. And from then on out, he never had a problem keeping his head on during a crisis or after a crisis. We used to tell the most inappropriate jokes to each other, and they were kind of our little inside jokes to each other. But we really helped each other through that deployment. This was back in 08-09, and a couple weeks after this incident was when Camp Blessing got overrun. And one of the medics that we had known from the Charlie Med that we were co-located with had just gone up there. And then about a week later, he comes back, and he's got a bullet wound going from his shoulder out his hip. And so we had everybody from the Charlie Med in there trying to be a part of the action because they wanted to take care of their fallen comrade. And it's commendable. But I remember getting really upset at them because they were in my way. There was just too many of them. I was like, if somebody doesn't get out of my way, I'm going to just start pumping you full of lidocaine until you pass out. Everybody backed up a little bit. Finally, my colonel comes in and she goes, "If you're not a part of my team, you're getting an Article 15. And everybody fled.
Now, for those who don't know, what's an Article 15?
Article 15 is non-judicial punishment in the Army. It's basically, you didn't really commit a crime, but you did something that's outside of the normal rules and regulations of the military, and they can impose what they call non-judicial punishment. Meaning you're not going to get a court-martial, but you're getting in trouble. And it can range from anything from docking a month's, about half a month's pay, all the way up to you losing rank. So my colonel she was old enough to be my grandmother and had a mean streak on her. She never turned it against us, but man, if somebody came into our ATLS or they came into the surgical area, she would just light them up. I used to call her Willie Pete because she burned like white phosphorus and just slag everything she touched. She could get scary sometimes, but she'd always turn around whenever she was done yelling and she'd be like, "Woo woo, are you okay? Did I scare you?" I was like, "Ma'am, you're the only person in the world that calls me that." She goes, "I know. That's my pet name for you." And she'd just walk off. And I was like, that's... and she'd always make me laugh every time she did that, because she'd just go, "Woo woo, come here a second, I need to talk to you." "Yes, ma'am, what is it?" She goes, "I don't know what I did with that pen." I was like, "What pen, ma'am?" And we just have these pointless conversations. She just liked talking to me, and so I think I was one of the few people there that kind of wasn't breathing down her neck to get something done or to pressure her to do something else, and so she just kind of latched on to me. And looking back, it wasn't the most professional relationship we had, but we had a good time together. I mean, we were fun. We made each other laugh, kind of like Daniel and I did. And it helped us kind of get through those hard times that you have on deployment sometimes. You know, she had someone she was missing back home, and we all did at the time. 15 months, a long time when you see a unit come in after you got there and leave before you do. It's a little disheartening sometimes. So we were a real close-knit team, not just me and the colonel, but all of the people that worked there, because we were only 15 folks. So we always had to work in close proximity with one another. We all had to do our own paperwork, all our own administrative stuff. Everybody had multiple extra jobs that they had to take care of. But I was able to do some really fun, interesting, and really just some amazing things that I would never have been able to do if I wasn't in a forward surgical team working directly for a doctor who was like, "Hey, do you want to put in a chest tube for me?" Yes, I would love to do that. We got a lot of opportunities that not many other medics had, and that was always made up for some of the hardships that we had to endure. Because although we had to work harder than most medics and some of the weirdest times, we also had more privileges that came with those responsibilities. So it evened out in the end.
Now, living in such close proximity, were there people that rubbed you the wrong way?
We lived in a hooch that all the men shared one giant room. All the enlisted men did, and then all the officers were in another giant room. But giant's not exactly the right word for it. It was probably 30 feet long by maybe 15 feet wide, honestly. And we had to fit 10 males in there. And you get 10 men living in that close proximity, and all we really have are ponchos to separate our bunks from each other. You can imagine the place didn't smell that good. Our heater very rarely worked in the winter, and the cool air never worked in the summer. So it'd be sweaty, and you'd have guys that are going to the gym eating protein shakes before they go, so they'll come back and they'll have that terrible protein flatus that's just awful. And you could just hear people from down the way in the room just... And then 10 minutes later, it would just punch you right in the nose. "Oh my God, what did you do? What unholy thing have you unleashed?" So yeah, we'd get on each other's nerves. Rank being what it was, Daniel and I were the two lowest guys on the totem pole, so there wasn't a whole lot we could do except complain. And, we were allowed to kind of get in some good-natured jabs at some of the upper enlisted men, as long as we were still respectful and we did our job, but we could kind of quip at them. And we started to get... It was a good way to relieve tension, because we were living in such close proximity that I think if we weren't able to kind of have those moments where we didn't have to be, Sergeant First Class Eaglin and Specialist Wooster, where we could just be Clint and Jayme for a little while, if we hadn't had that, I think we'd have probably ended up killing each other, honestly. But yeah, everybody had a different habit that would bug everybody else. I remember one guy, Sergeant Veach. He had the most annoying alarm clock that he bought from the bazaar on base one Saturday. And I can't describe to you the noise this thing would make, but it sounded like sounded like a children's toy getting put through a wood chipper. I think is the best way to put it. And he'd always set it for like a half hour before anybody had to be up, because he wanted to go to the showers first. And that thing would go off, and it, to this day, I swear, if I heard that, I'd still cringe. It was that bad, because every day for 15 months, that thing would go off at the same time, and it was just horrible.
Oh, how would you deal with that other than the quips? Did you have ways to let off steam?
We actually were lucky enough, after about maybe month 4 there, they built a permanent gym instead of just like a tent. And the gym kind of became a lot of people's second home. There's a lot of soldiers on deployment, you know, they like to go to the gym. To be totally honest, there's not many things out there that can occupy your time. So a lot of guys would just go to the gym and they'd work out a lot. And that was one way we could get out, some tension or some stress, is just go lift weights or go run on the treadmill or whatever. And we'd listen to music all the whole time. We'd never work out together, though. That was one thing I noticed. We would all we'd all each have our own workouts. And with your headphones in and you're doing your weights or you're doing your running, you were able to kind of shut everything else out. And for that short period of time, you were just this self-enclosed entity. And even though you weren't anywhere near alone, it kind of almost felt like you could be isolated. And I think that's why we did that. We didn't work out together because we had to be with each other literally the other 22 hours of the day. So I think that was the one time where we were just like, hey, we're all at the gym at the same time, but don't talk to me. I'm going to zone out here. And then we put up a basketball court about a couple months after that, and we used to go out there and play basketball with one another. I'm not much of a basketball player. I sucked. But it was still fun to go out there and just kind of good-natured competition kind of help make a cohesive team.
That makes sense, thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to share about your first deployment, or should we move on to your experience becoming a student?
We can talk about my student time. I remember getting out of the Army, and I remember looking around my house, and I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to do now. Everybody says I've got all these plans, and I said it too. I said, I'm going to get out, I'm going to go to school. And when I got out, I had no idea what I was doing. So I ended up going to UCCS's website, and I remember digging around on that for application information. And it had this list of things that I needed to have, people I needed to talk to, and so I started writing that down, getting that information together. I ended up having to call my high school, which I graduated in 2000, so trying to get my diploma, I was surprised they still had it, but they did. So they sent me my diploma and my transcripts from high school and my old college time. They sent me my transcripts, and I submitted all the information, and was less than a week later that I got accepted, and I was super excited. And then I remember having to call the VA to figure out how I could get my GI Bill benefits to kick in, start paying for stuff. And that was kind of like pulling teeth. Until I found the Veterans Association on campus, and they kind of helped me. They smoothed that process out for me. They're like, well, this is what you need to do. Make sure you have these forms ready. Talk to this person. I was like, all right. So they were a huge help, and really were able to answer some of my dumb guy questions that I had. Well, I don't know how to math. And they'd be like, okay, well, here, let's add it up then. But I remember going to school the first day of school. I still have this picture somewhere in my house. It's me with a backpack on, wearing blue jeans and a t-shirt. I just got a big thumbs up and a big stupid grin on my face. Because I was really excited to go back to school. I really wanted to do that for a long time. And I remember going to class the first day, and all my classes were on either a Tuesday or a Thursday. And I had every class on Tuesday and Thursday. So I was there from about 8 in the morning till about 6 at night, most nights. And I remember going through every class, and first couple of days of class, it's kind of a blow-off thing. It's like, hi, welcome to chemistry. We're going to learn about chemistry. And they go through the syllabus and all that. And I'm looking around, and I realized that I'm the old guy now. I'm 32 years old. I was in the Army for 8 years. And I'm looking around at this sea of these fresh-faced high school kids who just graduated last semester. And right away I felt isolated. I was like, oh, man, I have nothing in common with most of these people. So I kept to myself a lot for the first couple of weeks. I didn't really say much, didn't really interact with many people, just went to school, went to class, left. And it wasn't until I heard somebody in one of my anthropology classes say something about the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I don't remember for the life of me what they actually said. I do remember that it was a really uninformed and simplistic opinion. And I just remember sitting in class and I was like, uh-huh. And I did it out loud because the professor looked right at me and goes, Miss Wooster, do you have something you'd like to contribute? I look around and I was like, yeah, actually, I do. And I went off on like this 5-minute diatribe on how he doesn't understand what's going on. He doesn't really have any clue on how we're handling it or what we're doing. All he knows is what the news outlets back here are telling him. And all they're telling him is what's going to ever sell newspapers or get ratings or something along those lines. So they don't really have a perspective of what boots on the ground look like and kind of what the individual soldier's experience is. Because I remember more than once we'd be deployed and I'd hear stories from back home about stuff that we'd been personally involved in, conflicts or missions that went well. And I just remember going, that's not what happened at all. We didn't do that. That's not what happened. And then we just kind of started to lose faith in the media. Not that we had much to begin with, but when we kind of saw that no one was really getting the real story, we all started to kind of get a little disheartened. And listening to this young man say these things with his really simplistic, shallow opinion of how things are going, it just kind of reinforced that in me, and it kind of brought on a little bit of sadness because I was like, well, you guys really have no clue. And there was a part of me I was real angry at the same time, and I was like, you don't have the right to an opinion because you haven't done anything yet. I don't even think you've probably voted yet. How can you tell me how I'm doing my job or how well I'm doing my job? You have no idea what I do. It was kind of the summation of the conversation, but I think I might have done it a little more harsh because when I was done, he's just staring at his shoes, and the professor had a look on his face like, well, that was enlightening. And I was kind of like, I might have shot off at the mouth a little bit there, and I kind of sat down, and this young woman in front of me, she kind of turned around, and she goes, my name's Shannon, and that was the sexiest thing I've heard all day. And I had no words for it. I for the first time in a long time, I was kind of dumbfounded and flabbergasted. I don't, why? But she'd never had anybody kind of just tell it like it is, I think. And that's something I learned in the Army, is they'll tell you exactly how it is. They try to use more tact than maybe what I did. But I think she was really kind of shocked by the honesty of it. I'd given a really stark, very real interpretation of what I experienced, and I don't think anybody in that class really had ever had those kind of come to Jesus moments where everything got real all of a sudden, and it's not just pictures on a TV or theories in a book, and now it's right here in your face. And I think a lot of the people in that class, they'd never had those moments before because they were so young, and they just hadn't had the experience yet because they weren't old enough to. But having been deployed twice to Afghanistan and, had to carry some good men and women home in boxes, I was really offended by his opinion. It wasn't the best way to handle that, honestly, but after it was done, I felt a lot better. And I ended up finding him and apologizing because I was like, I didn't handle that well. I'm sorry. I don't mean to offend you. But what you said kind of hurt because you don't really know what you're talking about, and that's not your fault. It's just the way it is. And he ended up understanding my point too, and so we kind of came to a mutual respect and agreement on it. But that was where it kind of became real for me, in that sense. Is I was like, there is a huge gap, and I don't know. Even right now, sitting here thinking about it, I can't really tell you what it is. But it's definitely a definitive feeling you get as a veteran coming back from multiple deployments or transitioning from military to civilian life. There's this gap between you and so many other people out there who've never had the same experiences that you have, who will never have those experiences or had to have that level of responsibility and duty entrusted to them. And I said it before, I didn't serve because I believed in the war. I didn't serve because I believed that we were doing the right thing. I joined because I wanted to be a part of something that had value and meaning. And I didn't fight for politics. I didn't fight for ideas. I went there because I was really good at taking care of people. And as a medic, I excelled. And I love doing that. I took care of some of the best people under some of the worst conditions, and I wouldn't change any of it for the world. But I had this strong sense of fulfillment and purpose, because even though I didn't believe necessarily in who was telling me to fight or why I was fighting, I realized that my job wasn't necessarily as a fighter. I was a caretaker. I was a caregiver for people. And I've fought before. I fired my weapon at people that were trying to kill me, but never felt like that was my job. And I still believe that we were there with the best of intentions. We tried to do the right thing. Whether we succeeded or not, history will tell us that. But I know that every time I went outside the wire, I went for a good reason. I had the best of intentions to do good. And a lot of the kids, and I use that term very literally, a lot of kids in class had never had that sense of purpose or duty or honor and integrity. You know, they've never put on a uniform before in their life and been really proud of what they were wearing. You know, the only uniforms they probably put on were fast food uniforms or retail uniforms. But when you put on a soldier's uniform, it's an entirely different mindset. It's a different level of being. And I had an incredible amount of pride when I wore that uniform. And now that I'm out and I see other soldiers now, my wife specifically, who just went to AIT to be a medic as well, when I got to see her at graduation day from basic training, and I saw her in that uniform, and I saw drill sergeants and ACUs, I had a longing. I had a wistful kind of melancholy moment, because I really wished that was still me. But I realized that part of my life, that chapter, is over with. I don't want to go back to being a soldier, because I did what I came to do. I served and accomplished everything I wanted to while I was in the Army. And it was the best thing for me at the time to leave and become a civilian, but I still see people in uniform, and I kind of get a little far off look in my eye, and I miss the days that I got to wear it too.
So what do you do going forward to kind of bridge the gap that you were talking about earlier?
I have to realize and accept that a lot of these people, students, the young ones, I can't fault them for not having an experience that I did. And I try to be as diplomatic as I can. If they ask me questions like, well, what was it like in the Army? I'm very honest. I tell them exactly what I did and what it was like. And, you know, you always get those people who are like, oh, I would have joined, but if a drill sergeant was yelling at me, I'd punch him right in the face. Or you get those people like that all the time. You're like, yeah, sure you would. But it's about understanding people. That's really what it is. And that's been the hardest part, I think, for me and a lot of other veterans, is understanding that they're not like us. But that's not bad. And that doesn't mean I can't have friendships with these people. I'm very careful about who I pick as my friends. I always have been, but more so now, because bridging that gap between myself and a civilian who's never been in the military, it takes a lot of time and effort. And so you have to be careful of who you're investing your time in, and you can't expect to be friends with everybody, obviously, but if you choose the right people, you can kind of start to find some common ground. And really that's what life is really about, is just finding common ground with people. And it's not easy. It is hard, but having friends of mine who are also veterans makes it easier to transition, because we can get together and we can commiserate with one another, being like, oh my God, can you believe, how do civilians get anything done? I'm standing in a gaggle. But we can sit down and we can reminisce over old times. We can talk about our military careers with one another, and we can use the jargon and all that stuff, and we get it. We understand. And we all have those connections with one another. But I've made sure to make it a very real thing for me, is to try to reintegrate as a civilian to some degree. Because there's going to be a time when I'm not going to have, I think, as many veteran friends. They're going to move away. And anybody who's ever worn the uniform is always going to be my brother and sister. And the distance isn't so much a thing, but it is important for me to kind of involve new people as well. Especially going into a job such as nursing, I have to be able to understand and empathize with a lot of different people. And I always thought that it was going to be important for me to be able to find a way to close that gap with me and people who have never been in the military. Don't know if I answered your question.
Well, I think you did. Thank you. And we've kind of run the gamut. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we sign off?
No, I'm just hoping that this was helpful for you, and hopefully this helps someone else later on down the line.
Well, thank you.